How you doing, guys? It's Alessandro here from Spicy Moustache with some new tips in order to help you creating your own green area, indoor or outdoor, following the principle of do as nature does. Most people agree that gardening would be way more fun, and many people would be more inclined to take over like a new garden if it wasn't for all the back-breaking work of digging your garden. It may be a surprise to many people, but digging is not a necessary part of gardening. Today I had the special opportunity to collaborate with one of my main inspirations in the gardening community, Charles Dowding. I had the chance to visit his market garden Homeacres, where he grows all his produce using no-dig method. So let's not wait any longer, and today me and Charles will show you how to apply the no-dig method on a big and small scale, how we make our own compost, and much more.
Hello, I'm Charles Dowding and I'm in my garden at Homeacres, southwest England. It's a temperate oceanic climate, and I'm no-dig organic market gardening here, which is what I've been doing since 1982, and this is my fourth such garden. And all the time I've been practicing different ways of no-dig and how you can grow plants more quickly, efficiently and naturally. And the natural bit really comes from the soil. If you get the soil good and lively, many other things just flow correctly. And this is the result you see behind me. Is we're mid-autumn now, and everything you can see there is a second planting where we've been putting new crops in, succession planting through the summer, having already taken one harvest. And with the method I'm using, you don't need to add any more compost during the summer when you're using this method, because you're getting the soil so biologically active that it makes available a fantastic array and range of nutrients for plants. So this is really simple economical gardening with minimum effort, because we're not disturbing the soil at all. There's no heavy soil work. We spread some compost for sure, but not a huge amount. It's around 3 centimeters maximum a year on the beds, and about the same thickness of preferably old wood chip on pathways. So soil's covered all the time, and you're just planting into and through that, and the soil below gets very, very busy. And I've always felt this is the right way to go, and it's only recently that people have got interested in soil. I've always been organic, and that's been more concentrated on and where people are looking at life above ground, wildlife. But I really want to know more about wildlife below ground, and that's the bit which no-dig is really favouring to our incredible benefit. So let's have a look at a different bit of the garden, and I can explain it in a bit more detail. No-dig is the most simple method. You might hear versions of it where it's made to sound more complicated than it needs to be. It's simply a question of leaving soil undisturbed, and that means when you don't disturb soil, all the life that's in there, most of which we can't see and don't see, can be busy doing its work. And the mulch is on top, in my case the compost I'm using and a little bit of wood chip on the pathways, that's to feed soil life. So all the biology being well fed, it gets more busy, and then it's eating it's eating like the organic matter we give it, and then it's excreting, and then other organisms in the soil are eating those excretions. There's a whole cycle of eating and excreting going on. And some of the excretions are actually also from roots, plant roots, because plant roots photosynthesize in sunlight, and then they can give carbon to the fungal network which is in the soil, all the mycelial threads. Sometimes you get a hint of them being there, like here in places we see the soil is quite white. And sometimes at first it disturbed me, so I thought, what's going on here? White soil, that's not right. It's just full of mycelial threads, and it really smells of like mushrooms and the forest floor. And that mycelial network is fantastic at finding nutrients and moisture for plants, and in return for the carbon the roots give it, the soil life is feeding plants. So that's one of the many reasons why no-dig, doing less, actually works better. And I'm still amazed here. I think partly because my soil's improving all the time, but you know, we put in plants, say a month ago, and you look at them now, like there's some spinach, the last bed behind me, it's been in the ground for literally 1 month, and it's now just enormous, it's fantastic. And you can almost watch it growing. I'm sure that that's a lot to do with how this, it's like a root network that's already in the soil, the fungal threads. So I've never seen that thread working, if you like, but you know, there's an element of trust in no-dig, and I think that's what people who've come to this from more traditional backgrounds find difficult, that doing less, you're getting more. Linking back to the carbon in the soil, I'm working at the moment with a scientist where I'm running 2 beds side by side, trial beds. One is I dig every December, put the compost in a trench, like you know people do traditionally or have done. It's starting to change. And the other bed, I'm putting the compost on top. So each bed has the same amount of compost, the same amount of organic matter every year. And what this scientist is measuring, she said, I haven't got the exact figure yet, hope to soon, that there's much more carbon in the no-dig bed compared to the dig bed. So maybe it's like in cultivation, some carbon's oxidized, whatever. It's basically not there so much. And you know, for climate change, the implication is we can do our little bit, you know, have a no-dig garden, even like I say, if it's just 1 bed, it could be 1.2 by 2.4 meters. Make one, crop it as much as you can, and then you'll get the benefit of the wonderful plants. You'll get the beauty of it as well. That's a very healing thing of itself. You'll get the nutrition, you'll get the microbes, and you'll be keeping carbon or adding carbon to the soil. It's very much a win-win. And one aspect of it, and one thing that I'd like to share with you now, is making compost, because if you can make your own compost, that's fantastic. Sometimes you might need to buy it, but I want to show you how I make compost here. So I'm making compost here in many ways. I'm the kind of person who loves to try things out, and I've got a combination of different heaps doing different things. Like over there actually are my main heaps for the garden, which are quite big. They're 3 times the volume of the ones here, and that means it's easier to get them hot. If you want heat, you do need a certain amount of volume to create the kind of combustion almost. The heat though, it's not burning heat, it's heat between roughly 50 and 70 centigrade, which is warm enough to kill weed seeds, but not too hot to kill valuable microbes. And it also speeds the process up. It is not vital though. You can make lovely compost without it getting hot, and we do all sorts of crazy things here, not really crazy, but like putting on roots of bindweed convolvulus, for example. We put on the sort of things on the compost heap that most people will tell you not to, and you can. You know, there's a lot of nonsense out there. A lot of what you hear to do with gardening is wrong. You know, I say that in no uncertain terms. I've been more hesitant in saying that in the past, but I've got to a certain age now where I just feel I want to really make clear that I'm telling the truth as I see it, as I know it from experience. You know, I've tried all these things out. So the hot compost over there, we can fill one of those bays, which is nearly 3 cubic meters, in about 6 weeks, because we've got so much stuff here. This garden is between 1/4 of an acre, around that's 1,300 square meters roughly of cropped area, from which we are selling, we're selling over £20,000 worth, that's sterling money, a year. That's with me part-time and the help of one full-time guy and a couple of part-time helpers, mainly for picking, because we're selling quite a bit, salad leaves. And then we're also growing quite a lot of other vegetables. So to give you an idea of how intensive it is, and that does mean there's quite a bit of waste, like vegetable waste. We leave all the roots in the beds when we clear plants, but there's a lot of leaves. We're mowing some grass as well. We need grass around the edges for access and to keep it tidy. That means fewer slugs, fewer pests. It's good to have always a tidy area around your plot. And also I'm taking delivery of wood chips from like tree surgeons, arborists who are happy to give it away. Yeah, this is the beauty of making compost. You're turning waste materials into something really valuable, and you can use other people's waste materials. And particularly if you're not fussy about what you take. So for example, also in the compost heaps we put late blight on tomato and potato leaves and stems and fruits and everything. That's fine, that breaks down. Blight spores cannot survive in soil and compost. They need living tissue to survive in. So you can feel totally safe about that. And I know this from experience, I've tried it so many times. With bindweed roots, these roots that people are really afraid of, ground elder and some of the weeds that are perennial weeds that can be very persistent in the ground. Once you've got them out into a compost heap, they've lost contact with the main bit of parent root that has been powering their growth and making them seem invincible, and they always come back at you. Once they're in a compost heap, they've only got so much energy and resource in there which they can use to carry on growing, which is what they'll do initially, and then eventually it can be in as little as a month, maybe 2. They've just used up all that resource and they die. Yeah, it's a simple fact. I've seen it so many times again, even in a cool heap. So you don't need to worry about getting heat to kill perennial weed roots or for blight to die. The main one would be more seeds. If you're putting a lot of weed seeds or even flower seeds into a compost heap and it's not getting hot, they will survive and then they'll grow when you spread them. But because they're on top and the compost is really soft, you can easily run a hoe or rake through that surface. It's a very nice job, and you're not digging, you're just tickling the surface. And the secret with dealing with weeds like that is growing from seed is the old saying is hoe your weeds before you see them, which actually doesn't really make sense. But what it's saying is that you're catching them really tiny. If you disturb, this will be in the early spring, you disturb the surface where you spread your compost and it's starting to grow weed seedlings, even thousands of them, just tickle that up enough, disturb it enough that on a dry day, sort of like today, in early March, there's sun, there's a bit of wind, surface dries out quite quickly, those weeds die before you've even had to worry about them. So you save yourself a lot of work, and that's actually the key to good gardening. It's a little bit of knowledge, enough, a little bit of skill so you can do the right job nicely, and knowing enough that you can do these jobs at the best time. Timing counts for a lot, and you can learn this. Look it up. I'm offering a lot of free online resources on my website. You can also buy courses and things like that, or videos obviously. So inform yourself, and don't believe everything you see or read. But in terms of making compost, if you want to get it hot, I would suggest this is a minimum volume, and this is such a simple way of doing it, where you've got, we just took 4 pallets, knocked off the bottoms actually, just to make it easier of access, but you can keep the bottoms if you want. It's like in so many things, there's no right or wrong, it's how you want to do it. They're not held to the ground in any way, there's no posts rammed in at the corners, they're just sitting on the ground here. This was very weedy. 6 months ago this was couch grass here, there was nettles, there was bindweed, well there still is some bindweed, and ivy, which I pulled out actually, and brambles, which we dug out. So woody roots, you do need to remove the main stem, not all the roots but the main stem, so they can't regrow, or ivy we pull. And then we've got a bit of cardboard around the edge, that's just to control these weeds a bit, but there's no cardboard underneath the heaps because the heaps are the mulch, if you like. And the way this system works here is we fill this one first. We did that from mid-April to the end of May. And then the next heap we filled in June, early July was the one on the end, not the middle one. And then in early July we turned this one into there. And then in August we turned the far one into the middle as well. So effectively the middle one now has 2 heaps in one, and it means we're using a 3-bay system. There's 3 lots here, three areas, as a 4-bay. So we're kind of gaining a bay by kind of being clever really, and putting that that compost on top of each other, and I can just show you what it looks like actually, because the finished product, well, it's a joy to behold actually. So we have, this is not finished compost, but you could actually use it. It's only 3 or 4 months old, you know, it's incredible. And that's the result of putting on a combination of green means what it says on the tin, fresh green leaves, but also other green materials are things like fresh manure actually. That's green because it's high nitrogen, it is pretty much fresh, whatever's been eaten. And then weeds, leaves and roots, but not the soil around the roots. So soil is a brown, as is this is something we use a lot as a brown, and that is, there's been some grass growing in it, but basically this is old wood chip actually, and that's, I put a thin layer of that, sprinkle that over the green. So if we put on, we do it in layers just because it's easy then to kind of organise it. Put on maybe 5 centimetres of green, fresh green leaves, could be grass mowings as well, and then a sprinkling of brown on top, and that helps to hold structure in the heap. It helps to balance the carbon and the nitrogen. It reduces the heat sometimes, especially those big heaps, they can get too hot, and I don't want them over 70 centigrade. And that's how we make the compost you just saw. Within about 6 months, I would say on average. I've noticed how people love to have sort of precise timings and quantities and all this sort of thing, and actually don't worry too much about all that. You know, just have an idea, try a few things and see how it goes. But just to give you a guide, you know, we can make here nice compost which is usable within 6 to 10 months, I would say. And let's go and have a look now what some ways we've been using compost just in the last 6 months to create a new garden on top of a lot of weeds. This bed we created just 6 weeks ago, about 43 days to be precise, and it's on top of weeds, which includes grass, creeping buttercup, dandelions, bindweed, so quite a lot of perennial weeds, the weeds that just keep regrowing, and they probably will regrow a bit yet. But this is, we put cardboard first. The cardboard is just if you've got a lot of weeds. It's not synonymous with no-dig. You don't have to use cardboard to make a no-dig bed, but if there's a lot of weeds, it's really worthwhile because it acts as a temporary break. It stops them growing for a while because they can't get through it, and then it decomposes. You know, cardboard's not forever. So 2 months and your cardboard has softened, and actually then any weeds that have still survived, which is actually not many of them, but there's often 1 or 2, they will push up through the compost. But you put compost on top of the cardboard to any depth you can manage, really up to around 15 centimetres. I would say 10 to 15 centimetres is great, but that does take a lot of compost. This is absolutely not every year. It's a one-off. It'll take your soil to a high level of fertility, which it will remain at for several years to come. So that initial dose of compost, I would call it an investment. You know, what better thing to invest in your soil for your food on an ongoing basis? It'll just keep on giving. It's the gift that keeps on giving, it really is. And once the cardboard is decomposed, then the roots of your plants, which you can put in on the same day you make a bed like this, that's what we did here. So we made this on the 18th of August, filled it, actually walked on it, because this compost wants to be firm. I'm actually just going to do that to show you. You know, this is the firm bed. We can walk on all our beds if we want to. They're firm enough to do that. That's fine, because roots like firm soil or compost. They don't want it all loose and fluffy. You know, they'll grow into that and then fall over. So make it firm. You can't compact compost. So compost is not like soil. I don't recommend filling a bed like this with soil. That doesn't really work so well in the long term. It can give you quite nice results initially, but yeah, there's plenty of soil underneath in most situations. I mean, you could make a bed like this on concrete, but you'd need quite a bit more compost. But there's soil below, and these plants then root into the soil, and that's how it works. You know, once the weeds have died, you've got soil with the existing lovely structure. You've got air holes in it where the weed roots were, and now they're available for the plant roots to go in. You've got all the biological structure there. So if you can see here, 42 days of growth, and we've already had 2 harvests, so there would have been a lot more if we hadn't picked it. This spinach, you know, again, it's just grown fantastically. That was sown early August, transplanted 18th August, and already harvested twice. Same with the red mustard, the pak choy, the salad rocket, and some bulb fennel at the far end. That's where this bed ends, is at the fennel. There's different beds further up. And now I'll show you, we'll have a look at the rest of the garden from a different vantage point. You can see what else we've been up to here. What you're seeing here, up to the line of small trees, there's 300 square meters in this area, which we started cropping just this spring. And in February it was just like weeds. Have an idea what you're going to do, but don't feel you have to stick to it rigidly. Be prepared to adapt according to conditions. Like for example, this spring was really cold and we were struggling here to get things going at first. Using fleece a lot, that's fantastic. Fleece covers, they warm up the ground a bit just for those new plantings in the spring. And then when they came off and then it warmed up and everything was fine. But that was so different to the previous spring. And so you've got to be, you know, there's no one formula that's always going to work every time. You've got to be prepared to try a few things and hang in there. Just hang in there. You know, every spring when I start, I'm never confident. I'm always wondering, God, is this going to work again? I don't take anything for granted. And that's a good state to be in, because then you can be pleasantly surprised. Here, once the polythene came off, it was just level ground from just with a bit of compost on top of the original soil. Weeds pretty much all dead, except the bindweed roots are still there. We spread about 3 centimetre of compost on top, 16-inch, 40 centimetre pathways. So the paths are quite narrow, and the beds are, I don't know, some people might call these quite wide, but 1.2 metres I find is a really good bed width. And then, like you see, you can walk on them. We've actually sown some green leaves here, mostly brassica leaves. So these are either cover crop or a bit of salad as well. Some of these are leaves you can eat like mustards as we go into the autumn, and they'll keep on growing. And then they're killed by frost. So as a cover crop or green manure for no-dig, the brassica plants in the autumn are really good. These brassicas, mostly mustards. And you can see also I've got no wooden sides. So apart from that one new bed where we're going to take the sides off after a few months once the compost has settled, and then it holds its shape after that. So not having wooden sides, that saves you money, and also reduces habitat for slugs. So we do have slugs here for sure. But again, I think no-dig really helps. You know, I've never seen a beetle eating a slug, but people assure me they do. And when you don't disturb your soil, all those things happening that we don't normally see are allowed to continue happening, and most of them are beneficial to us. And frogs and toads, you know, that's another one. We find a lot of them actually here. You know, that you've got that whole balance. So the less one interferes, the more chance there is of getting that nice selection of habitats, pests, predators, all going on, this eating and excreting that I mentioned in the beginning. You know, it's a living soil, it's buzzing, and you can create this in your garden. Do have a go. I hope you've enjoyed having a look around here at what I'm doing on a slightly larger scale, and you can see what Alessandro is doing in his urban garden on a smaller scale.
Visiting Charles was an incredible experience to see the no-dig method applied to a big-scale garden like his beautiful market garden. This is my urban garden, and it's mostly on concrete, so I grow all my food on raised beds. I have around 12 raised beds between the backyard garden and the front yard, which has been recently converted into a community garden for all my neighbors. However, it's not ideal to have wooden sides on your raised beds, because the wood can decay and rot and create pockets where the slugs and snails can hide and come out at night. But what I'm using is heat-treated wood, which is an old lumberjack technique to make sure that the wood doesn't decay over time and it's preserved for a longer period of time. If you're planning to have raised beds like I'm having here, you could either use the same as I'm using. So for the majority, I'm using pallet collars, which are heat treated and stackable, or you could use oak wood, which is hardwood and pretty hard to decay and rot. To make most of the raised beds in my garden, I use 2 pallet collars, which are ideal because they are extremely easy to assemble. You can line them with a breathable material, which will also cover the bottom. If you have grass or weeds growing at the bottom, you can use cardboard, and it will drastically reduce the amount of weeds growing. Cardboard is great because it will decompose in a really short period of time. The next step would be to fill up the base of your raised bed with the least decomposed compost but mostly rotten and tamping it down until you add the next layer. You can now add a layer of well-rotted compost which is ready to plant straight away. I also add a fungal dominant compost, which is not necessary, but it helps to improve the fungi activity in your garden. The fungal dominant compost that I'm using is produced by SD microbes, and I highly recommend to try and use it in your growing space. When I plant new plants in the garden, I use a dibber to disturb the soil web as less as possible. And also, whenever a plant finishes to produce, don't lift it up, including the roots, but cut it at the base and leave the roots in the ground, because the roots will start decomposing and feeding the microorganism, which will turn them into new nutrients for the plants that you're going to plant next in the same area. Once your raised bed is ready, you can start planting in your plants, and all you need to do is to top up with more compost once a year. Compost is made of organic matter, which will decompose and feed microorganisms. The microorganisms feeding on your compost will excrete new nutrients, and the compost will decrease in volume. This is why you will notice your raised bed looking less full. And using no dig, all you need to do is to top them up with more compost until you bring the level to the top of your raised bed. If you add only compost to your raised bed, it's always decomposing, leaving some space for new organic matter. Also, once you fill up your raised beds only with compost, once the compost is settled down, you can remove the sides of your raised bed. Like in this case, I've got some bricks, so I'm just gonna remove them to show you. And you can see that it's holding the shape without collapsing. And you could also walk over your raised bed without worrying about soil compaction or damaging the raised bed. If you have a small garden like mine, you could either replicate the same system as Charles in a smaller scale, or use a compost bin like mine. I recycled this old barrel by drilling all along the sides for aeration and at the bottom for drainage. It doesn't get too hot because I don't produce a big volume of compost, but it still does the job, producing organic matter to feed my plants. Sourcing material for people in the city like myself could be pretty challenging, but I have a few tips to help you sourcing them. Like, for example, I source wood chips from the local park whenever they're pruning down the trees, and you just need to ask your local council to double check if they sprayed any chemical in the area. Also, you could ask your local coffee place if they dispose of any organic coffee ground, which is an ideal green material to add to your compost pile. Or you could add some green or brown materials coming from your household, reducing the wastage that you produce every single day. The main point when using this kind of technique is to not mess up the macro and microorganisms in your soil, and to try to reduce your impact to a minimal disturbance and cooperate with nature and keep things as natural as possible. You can use this method anytime that you would like to start a garden with a minimal effort, producing a lot of food. I hope you liked today's video, and if so, please subscribe to my channel, turn on the notification settings so you can be notified every time I post a new video, and I'll see you next Friday for a new episode. Thank you so much for watching. See ya.